Right, okay, so I have a range of people here on the panel, from sales to techs, etc. So there you go.
Here's a fire starter. So no one from tech support.
No long call with tech support. Right, so they're going to help me kick off the conversations with you guys, because we need your input, because they're not going to do all the talking. These are the points that we've listed. I don't think we're going to have time to go through all of it, which is fine, but we will flex accordingly. So we'll time box this. Well, it's up to you guys, but I would say an hour, maybe just short of an hour, so we'll probably cover 2 or 3 points. So the first one, one that I get asked or hear a lot during my line of work. So we're doing dev team, we're doing multiple releases a day, we're super cool, but from a security point of view, what sorts of security testing should be considered and adopted for such a fast-paced team? So if I can hand to someone who wants to start.
So I think the obvious answer to this one is automation. There are plenty of tools out there. We've got a couple of representatives here, Contrast and White Hat, that are here. The thing about DevSecOps and testing is, these teams want to deliver at pace, and they want to make sure their security, their software is secure. But there's multiple elements of the pipeline. You've got application security, you've got network security, infrastructure security. You also, in DevSecOps world, which we're going to go talk about SOC in a minute, but you've also got monitoring and alerting and feeding that back into the pipeline. The only way that you can really work at pace is automating a lot of these processes and being able to deliver secure software without too much human integration. I totally mentioned just a minute ago, humans are a weak element. Take humans out of it, automate the process. There are plenty of options out there. There's SaaS, there's DAS, there's IaaS, there's FOSS, there's network scanning. There's lots of tools out there that can help tech developers and DevOps teams. So, in my view, that's the way that I think you answer the first question. But obviously, I'd like to hear challenges to that.
Please come up.
Russia, come on.
Yes. Of course.
We're trying to build testing within the CI/CD pipeline, and one of the challenges that we come across is that depending on whether you're actually testing front-end applications or back-end applications, the type of testing changes, right? So whilst technologies like SaaS, for example, are relatively effective for back-end stuff, you can still run through, scan them through, and then effectively you've got false positives to deal with. The issue really comes from single-page applications, Angular frameworks, and so on, right? So the question is, do you see a dual testing strategy being necessary, depending on whether you're testing front-end and back-end? And if it is necessary, then if you're looking at front-end applications and you're looking to test for a Dust type tool, let's think of something that's open source like Zap, right? Then have you effectively devised a strategy that allows you to test the end-to-end application end-to-end? So effectively, you kind of triggering all the different JavaScripts that will basically sit at the front end, and then effectively kind of make all the necessary calls. For example, in an Ajax heavy applications, when making API calls to different parts. But that's possibly the kind of core part of the question. So, I'd like to understand basically what the panel thinks about that.
Okay, I'm happy to kind of build on what you were saying. So, first of all, I'm an architect, so I'm going to ask some more questions back to yourself, I'm afraid. Is how far have you gone down the journey to everything is code?
We're pretty good in terms of kind of defining the pipeline as code. So we're defining the infrastructure as code. We're on the way to defining compliance as code. UML as code. So yeah, I would say relatively mature in the respect.
Excellent. Do you think you're rebaking the cake? So are you penetration testing something that may or may not be already known and therefore wasting resource?
So that is part of the challenge, right? Because effectively, if you work with assumption, you've got some kind of aggregation mechanism. So we are using Defect Dojo as a defect tracker at the moment. So yes, so in terms of duplication, it's part of the journey, right? But the question is, how do you effectively identify gaps in the approach? So to be able to identify when you saw reinvented the wheel, it's like, do you know if there are any gaps? You see where I'm going with that?
Absolutely, and that's the reason for my question, of course, is do you know what you've got where?
Correct.
And it's really difficult to work out across a complex application landscape what you've got where, what's open source, what's proprietary, and focus, because you can only be synchronous, and this is what this is all about. You get back to synchronicity. If you can test synchronously and make either an automated or a very rapid manual, that's up for discussion, we can discuss this later, decision as to whether to progress or not, that's where you want to get to. With code, with everything's code, and that can mean many things to many people, is that you can focus on the area of change and a small iteration of change rather than a 3-month traditional change, let's call it.
But that would imply that you have got an understanding of regressions, right? So if you've got regression, you're already kind of like relatively mature. So how do you get to that point of maturity? That is the question, right?
Map what is where, and I mean down to if you're, I don't know what you're developing, but say you're a Python developer, you're bringing stuff in from Python. People have done the research beforehand. If you're bringing in an XML parser and it's got a vulnerability, do you really need to go and read every line of that code if they've already done that and you trust that research? Therefore, you can be much, much more precise in what you need to read rather, so your own proprietary business logic code type of thing, and you can rely on the data of other security companies, which are in this room, to cover the 80%. Maybe you're using everything Python 8 to cover 80% of your application.
If you don't mind, so this switch back to the front-end analogy, right? So if you've got like a modern application that you've got Ajax-driven API calls, so you're not effectively just testing the code itself, but you're also testing the way that the code actually approaches and actually starts pulling resources from different APIs. So the question then becomes, what type of testing allows you to achieve the level of coverage, whereas then the next step forward becomes regression testing, which is what you're talking about, right?
Exactly, but you'll be using open source, one would assume, from NPM, it's from end. So JavaScript modules to go and create your front end.
Or like an Angular framework.
So the framework itself could be vulnerable. Do you need to test that? Probably not. Somebody's probably already done it. And it depends on your utilization. And what you need to do is get to the point that you do only the required testing to be synchronous as fast as possible to be able to test on commit. That's where we're aiming for. And that's what I mean about getting to everything as code, so you can focus on the point of change, if that's what we want, on multiple points of change, preferably small change, because this is what it's all about, to be able to focus in and say, actually, I changed this API, this change, let's test regression, alternate regression testing, maybe synchronous, so you can move rapidly in that ever-increasing pace of deployment. That's where we want to get to, continuous deployment, right?
Right.
But don't degrade quality by doing it. It does take time. There is no magic kind of bullet. I'm happy to discuss afterwards, but that's where I would get to. Everything is code, automation, as you absolutely say, but don't redo the work. If you've tested it once and you know that version of that framework, if you're confident that it's not had vulnerability since you did that testing, why retest it? It's still the same.
It's the first time that I'm sort of inquiring about. So does the panel agree with that? Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
So there seems to be an assumption there has to be synchronicity. I have to challenge that and say you could have asynchronous testing if you can bear the risk of defects making it through to live. As long as you negotiate that with the product owner, you can put defects through and then roll them back. They've only been there for a few hours. If you have a piece of asynchronous testing that completes after they.
But what's confusing is that we work with the assumption that the defects are known and categorized and catalogued, and effectively then we kind of work in, and maybe I'm making the wrong assumption here, but then how do we identify defects in the first place? Let's say, for example, that we've got a situation whereas we are, again, I'll go back to the Ajax example because it's a difficult one to test, right? Because as long as you're testing a specific function in SAS, then you're kind of working with a finite entity. But when you're basically testing or trying to test the Ajax data application, then you tend to basically work with a set of unknowns, right? Because you are making calls against endpoints that you don't necessarily know, right? So the point I'm trying to make is to get to the level of, to get to the baseline that you're referring to, right? Because I agree with you. Once you get to the baseline, then you kind of working with an entity. Has anything changed? Yes. Okay, well, let's test things, right? If nothing has changed, then there's no need to test. We're on the same page with regards to that. But how do you get to that baseline? That's the point. That's the question.
So you need to go and precisely identify what version of the frameworks that you're using. Yeah, that's number one. Because I can almost guarantee you, if you've got more than 10 applications, you probably don't know to the subpoint level of what's in your applications. So first of all, find out what you've got is step number one. Because if you don't know what you've got, how can you manage it?
So fall back on the security framework they're using. So if you're using Angular, make sure that you're effectively using the security features.
If you know the precise subversion, subpoint version of Angular for every application, you then can say this application is more important to my business than this application, therefore you can prioritize, because that's important too.
Mm-hmm.
We don't all have, unlimited money, resource, time, they're all things that get us every day, is to find out what you've got where. Then you can say, actually, well, these 4 applications, 3 applications, whatever, are actually business critical to me, so focusing on those. Then you need to get into, right, what calls am I using? Yeah, this is not easy. There's no red button fix. I've been retired in Barbados a long time.
So from a testing perspective, you would use something like an Ajax Spider. So this is the crux of it. So what's the right tool to use?
If you need to go into the business logic, that's the only way to do it. Absolutely. And you need to then say, right, okay, is this call subject to malformed payload or whatever it might be? And you need to get to that baseline. But you can't get to the baseline until you know what you've got in your applications. So this is iterative. And that's why I say, if you try and fix the world, you'll fix nothing. So try and fix one thing well, get something that works as a journey. It might not be, on sprint, it won't be sprint at all. And prioritize your applications, go through that iteration to get to that baseline, and then go through that same journey with your next more important application and work backwards. Because there'll be some applications that, to be quite frank, who cares, yeah? If they've got
a prioritization again, absolutely, yeah.
It's about focus and then back to automation. And if you can get to that baseline, then you can become synchronous. Because you don't want to push a defect. Vulnerability is a defect in my world, it doesn't matter, it's a bug. So that's where you need to get to, and it will take time on that journey.
Sure. Thank you.
And obviously, Ryan, more than welcome the opportunity to come to your office in Malawi. Not Barbados.
Thank you. Happy with that?
Sure.
Any more from the audience? Anything else? Sam?
Just to expand on the previous question for Claudio, of course. So, Claude, thanks very much for using OWASP free tools that you mentioned, OWASP Zap and Defect Dojo, so absolutely free and open source. The thing is, as Ryan mentioned, instrumentation, right? So, and automation. Once everything is a code, this is what should be concentrated on, right? Make sure everything is a code, everything is automatable. Your challenge of testing applications, which can be single-page applications and complex JavaScript, Ajax, and backend API calls, right? It needs to be done with a defense in depth. That's my approach, right? My suggestion to you. So you can use OWASP Zap from both backend and front-end testing, because, for example, Zap has an extension allowing you to utilize Selenium, which means when Zap is running, you can actually launch a browser and start clicking on things and simulating the browser and testing that client side of things. On top of all that, as Ransom mentioned, there's a framework issue. So if you're using Angular, you can have SaaS tools, right, which will detect it, whether what you're using, and can also help you identify any vulnerabilities on the SaaS side in the JavaScript, both on the front end and on the back end, and of course adding.
Would you use a SaaS tool for front-end application?
Of course, because it's JavaScript, right? And it will have, for example, DOM-based XSS, right, as one of the examples. Or one particular application that I inspected, right, had hard-coded passwords and API keys, JavaScript on the client side. So all the hacker had to do to hack into application, just right-click on the web page, say root source, there you go, here's my password, I can now log in and wreak havoc, right? So SaaS will find it, right? However, SAS will not find issues with API. It will not find, for example, reflected process with this type of vulnerabilities. This is why you need to use both of them as defense in depth, right? And of course, you're moving further to the open source because everything is open source, right, in your world. So Angular, right? Particular versions, they have known vulnerabilities, they have known CVEs, right? So it's one thing you test in client-side code, another thing you test in the server-side code written by your developers. Another thing, you are actually validating the vulnerabilities in the frameworks and modules and libraries that the developers are using, because Angular has lots of known issues. Node.js has lots of known vulnerabilities. You need to make sure that your testing program includes this. But once you identify this, okay, I'm on a vulnerable AngularJS version, on an Angular Node.js version, just Angular, well, vulnerable jQuery is the biggest problem I've seen so far, because jQuery is one of the most difficult JavaScript libraries that everyone uses, and it's like a zebra. You have a version vulnerable, next version not vulnerable. Then you have a vulnerable, not vulnerable. So it's a nightmare. And it's very easy. Some developers say, okay, I need to implement this function. We need to move one version down of jQuery because it doesn't work on the latest version. And you open a can of worms, you introduce hundreds of new vulnerabilities, and then you get a situation like, I don't know, British Airways or something like that, and you know, all the credit cards and details being scraped from the page, right? That kind of thing. Mentioning that particular data breach as well, of course, what Zap will find, for example, all the issues with the CSP policies, right? Or your security headers to make sure that it's all there, so you have a protection from more of an infrastructure side, right? So it's always defensive depth. You can't just say, well, give me just one tool, which is a silver bullet that fixes everything. You need to address every single layer. Yeah. There you go. That's my answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very comprehensive.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that's said, and I think we actually need to start a little bit earlier as well. I think if you're talking about organisations that deliver several times a day, the likelihood is you're not running some big monolith application whereby everyone's changing one single code base. You're likely running in small teams. The small teams running on modular applications. Different teams are changing application, specific modules, and you're uploading, small code changes, small modules. That's how you can do that in a safe and secure, a safe way, really. I'm not even talking about security there. I'm just talking about the general flow of releasing multiple times a day. So when we look at it from that point of view, I think the buck starts at the developers. Developers are making small code changes, they're releasing quickly, and when you are trying to release tweets several times a day, everything is risk management, even quality, even putting in quality bugs. Can you run full test suites against every single change you upload? No, you can't, right? There's long-running tests, there's performance tests, there's huge numbers of system tests, integration tests that you run. You can't run everything against just small changes. So you risk manage by running just what you think is going to be affected, okay? And if you want to continue to do that, major changes, of course, major changes, you will run huge numbers of tests. You'll run full suites. And those changes you don't do every few several times a day. And the ability to run, deploy several times a day is because you make small changes. So when we think about security, first of all, we need to bake security into a developer mindset. So developers, when they release code, when they write code, they need to think about not just the code they're writing, but the vulnerabilities that they're adding through dependencies. They need to, when you go through code reviews, make sure that developers are thinking in a security fashion. What new dependencies are we bringing in? You need to think about, not just where we go. So from the code review first, then when the developer is actually testing locally, are they actually testing with security tools locally before they push? When they push to a repository, whether it's a GitHub Enterprise, GitHub Local, whatever, are there going to be tests on a pull request, being created? Before we even get through that CI/CD pipeline, there should be tests that are pushed. And the CI/CD pipeline, as you get closer to production, will actually test further different things until you, get to things like the OWASP, the ZAP, testing tool, and things like that. And so the process doesn't start, during CI/CD. It should start well before that. And the earlier, of course, you find those bugs, the easier it is to fix. We don't want to find things. Otherwise, you're not going to release several times a day if you find things just before you release, right? Because you're going to find bug after bug after bug, and it's going to take a few days before you fix those. So I absolutely think the bug starts earlier. And in terms of the sync async testing, I think, again, it's risk management, right? The sync testing is going to be quicker, and you will rely on that for your smaller changes because you have a degree of certainty about the change you're making. If you're not bringing any new vulnerabilities in, well, you're unlikely. Sorry, if you're not bringing any new dependencies in, or you're not changing your dependency tree, you're unlikely to be bringing in any new vulnerabilities because the dependency tree is likely to change unless, on build and deployment, you pull in different versions. There are a number of different things, but it's not as simple as tooling. It's a huge mindset and culture as well, for sure. Oh, it's like questions time. I love it.
Cool.
Soapbox.
It's like, hi, I'm Kate, and I have a monolith.
What do we hold?
But I also have multiple releases a day, so that's nice. But yeah, completely agree with what you're saying. So kind of like so if we think of security issues as defects, like you were saying, it's the same way that you want someone to give a code review for defects in your JavaScript, you want other people to give a code review to potentially flag those security issues. And you can do that in lots of ways. I know that Snyk have a IDE plugin, which can start flagging up security issues. So get them in front of your developers before they've even committed their code. GitHub has a really nice feature called code owners, which means that if there's an area of the code base that might be a little bit worrisome that you want to kind of get notified about, you can use the magic regex of that to immediately ping you if anyone's deciding to just completely change something. So alarm bells can go off and you can go chat to them. Lots of other ways as well. So kind of getting it into the into the GitHub integrations as well. Cool.
Wow, that exploded a bit, didn't it? That's good. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
So I also want to add as well that it's not just to shift left. You've also got to think about you are going to release vulnerable code. It is going to happen no matter what you put in place. You're going to release vulnerable code. So it's also important that you have a program of red team testing, perhaps bug bounty testing, and feed those bugs that you find back into your pipeline and fix those as well. So don't think that these tools are simple bullets, because they're not. You've got to test end to end, from getting developers to test their code before they check in, right through to post deployment and beyond. And I think if you want to deploy secure applications and secure services, you've got to look at the whole broad spectrum all the way through.
Can somebody write up tonight's talks, please? Any more questions or opinions on this? What about, so I guess it was kind of touched upon in terms of it needs to be small, because if we're releasing multiple times a day, then as we said, we need to just test the bits we need to test. But I guess there needs to be a process to understand the different types of testing, because we've made this type of change, and make sure that that complete testing suite does actually accommodate the business objective of releasing multiple times a day. I guess for me that's still a bit of a challenge. I'm not sure if anybody has an opinion on that in terms of an approach.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day when I used to work at IBM, we actually wrote a kind of homegrown tool. This is for quality only, of course, but I'm sure it will match security as well. And the homegrown tool that we wrote, this was for changes. So I used to work on WebSphere, because it gets worse. I used to work for WebSphere and WebSphere.
I'm a recovering WebSphere developer.
Yeah. And I'm sure WebSphere will make your monolith look like a microservice, because we had the builds that would barely run in a day, right? And so when we had one of the things that we wanted to do was just reduce the build time, right? Let alone try and release it quicker. So what we did was we actually had we used code coverage a lot, because when we're in a monolith, you don't have components that are individual, and when you make changes to a component, you have a test suite for that component, and you know which other components it touches, so you can run those test suites. That makes it nice and simple. But when you have this kind of big spaghetti monolith code, it makes it very hard to understand, right, well, which suites do I need to run? So we actually At the time, we used Emma, the code coverage tool, which allows us to compare our code coverage results across previous across multiple builds, so we can work out the changes that we're touching, which tests actually touch the methods or branches that we have tests for. And then we used to run different suites or portions of suites depending on what percentage of suites covered those methods. I'm sure there's probably a tool that I don't know about. Someone's probably making a lot of money from it somewhere that does something similar. When you turn it into a much more of a modular environment, your changes are going to be more modular. But I'd love to hear how you would do that in your environment as well.
So is there a solution out there, or should I start coding tonight?
Can you start asking questions?
1 minute.
So your question about how to develop your challenges, yeah. So you're saying that if you look at embedding security into what you do, that causes you a problem. Is that what you're saying? Is that your question?
No. So what I'm saying is, if the business objective is to release multiple times a day, the question is, what sort of testing should be executed or considered? So there's a number of factors which has been well articulated. So there's only conduct the tests that's required for that relevant change. The change needs to be small, so therefore the test execution time is smaller and supports multiple releases a day.
Okay, so my question is, what's the issue with that gentleman was saying there, automating it and having continuous testing taking place? Because if you have that, surely that's not impacting on your day-to-day work.
Well, automating is fine, but you need to know what to automate. So if your security testing suite involves different types of security testing, so static code analysis was mentioned, dynamic is an obvious one, interactive is probably another one, right? As well as understanding open source, etc. If you're going to run through that complete suite, right, that's not going to work, because if your code base is large and you're not just submitting the code changes to do the scan for static code analysis, for example, right? So a typical commercial product for static code analysis will probably crunch through, 100,000 lines of code per hour. But if your code base is in the millions, because that's your solution, you're not going to be able to support multiple releases a day.
Plus the releases, you don't want to be. You don't want people to come in at 9 a.m., 10 a.m. I don't know what developers do these days for midday. Have a couple of coffees, have a chat, write some code, push that code, start your actual testing around 3, and then just when everyone's ready to go home at 5 or 6 p.m., push 3 different releases at the same time, right? You want it to be spaced out so that when you actually do your production testing and your smoke testing, you have enough time between 2 releases that you can actually isolate where the issues are. Make sure you don't get conflicting things like, okay, here's the issue, but now that's compounded by another problem, and it just gets messy. So you want when you actually push a change, for that change to be live in. I'd love to know what the average is, but I would say no longer than an hour or something like that, probably less.
What I want to add there is probably what helps is if you're looking at your branching strategies and then say, okay, we're not going to run all the scans on the main branch and then run it on a future branch, because then, if you want to run a main branch, you basically try to do it out of hours. I know there's not really out of hours anymore in this economy, but so then if you run SASTA test, whatever, and it's on a future branch, you do a much smaller portion of your code base than across your whole code base. Then you do a full-on test on the master branch at the later time. It's risk management, but you can't do all at once.
Michael covered some of the points, but some of these tests, in also integration tests, the part of tests you can do on your application can be much longer than the product. You waste time with new features. So some of these tests are very hard to do in terms of combining the cadence of the release you want to do. It's always the tricky point of how often you run those tests, how long do they take. I know some of our tests, for instance, take 8 hours to run. So if you do a release a day, you just walk by the tests.
Just release a bit more.
Friday.
any more? I think this first point has actually crept into other points that we're going to discuss, which is all good. We had a pen test friend, didn't we? Any opinions from yourself on this?
I think perhaps to some extent you're missing a trick here, because we're talking about how things change once they're in the hands of developers, but to a large extent, what you need to be doing to begin with is a matter of enforcement. One of the things that a lot of common contemporary developers do is, I want this, and they're just picking it out of the air. What you need to be doing is enforcing the tools that are available to begin with, the packages that are available to them with them to begin with, and you test them thoroughly beforehand. That way they don't become part of the pipeline testing anyway. And the other thing that we're missing is that you can test these things incrementally, the tiny little changes, but tiny increments become big change over time. Look at us, we're not amoebas. And you need to periodically say, I'm going to test the whole damn thing. I'm going to knock it with a mallet.
Just on the last subject, I think it's horses for courses. I agree with what you're saying, but when you work in an organisation that has 25,000 developers with 8,000, 10,000 applications, you can't test everything before. You can't test anything before. You can't tell the developers what they can and they can't use, and you have to have multiple strategies. One is the strategy that you were referring to, which is let's try and tell them what they should and shouldn't be using. But the other strategy has to be, when we know they do things that they shouldn't do, how the hell do we capture that as well? Because in a large organisation, you absolutely can't just rely on one. You've got to rely on multiple attack vectors, for want of a better word, on the developers themselves.
Well, that goes back to something else that's been overlooked. We've been talking technology all the time. To some extent, as has been mentioned, it's people that are the problem. And if you've got people who are playing off the field, you've got to do something about the people, not the technology.
Sack all of them.
Is that with a big mallet? Can be helpful. Yeah.
So, from what you were saying there, a lot of what you're talking about is dependent on what platform you're deploying your applications onto. So what I work on is deploying a PaaS platform that these web applications would be deployed onto. And you can control, if you're using containerized or you're using something like OpenShift, you can definitely control what images are being available and made available to the developers. And you can also, instead of going in and testing libraries, which you shouldn't be doing, you should be relying on critical vulnerabilities and exposures databases to inform you of what are vulnerabilities in those images. Then it's on to the developers to test their own applications. So it depends completely. It runs on nicely to the next questions that are there about if you're using a monolith, a microservice, or serverless, it's different. It's a different context it's what are you testing, basically.
So building on the points that our friend over there was making, DevSecOps is no different to traditional security approaches of multiple points of control, audit, feedback. This is, security in depth, concentric circles, whatever you want to look back to, way back in the day, is no different. If you have a single point of control, you put something in front of a developer, they go rogue, they have a bad day. That people element, I hate my organization, I am going to inject this data leakage, library, whatever. That does happen. I've seen it happen. But if you're catching it as a point in your delivery pipeline that's beyond their influence, even if they go rogue, if it goes into a centralized build and you fail the build after they've committed that defect, you still ensure the quality of your delivery. So DevSecOps is no different in that respect, that you can't just put a single point of feedback or control in at all. And I think you're very correct in doing so. And also, if you implement something today, is it good in 3 months? Has there been a day zero, disclosure? You need to keep asking, is it good? At least every day. At least every day. Because if trust goes bad again, where is it? Can you fix it? Do you know where you're using it? Those are all questions that need to be built into these feedback cycles.
So if the dev team comes up with, oh, I want to use this new tech, this new library, naturally there's a lag in terms of technology and testing coverage. Do we then fall back on traditional manual testing? Do we have a choice?
I'll say one word and then pass it to my friend. Context. Depends on the context.
Or the other alternative as well is to educate the developers to actually write tests themselves for security vulnerabilities around the technology you want to use. When we see all the time where, you know, the vendors selling application security testing tools are a bit behind some of the tools that are actually available to developers. The developers want to work with the latest tools. I think the onus is on the developers as well to make sure they're writing secure code, to write the tests themselves, to make sure they're writing secure code. They're not going to get full test coverage that way, they're not going to understand all vulnerabilities. But if they know the IOS top 10, for example, they can code defensively against that. And it's about educating the developers and making sure they understand that and develop that way.
I'm sure you have to check that. Not just
Eventually you would have to check that to make sure that once the vendors are caught up, you know, you do expect them to integrate tools. But trust but verify that.
So yeah, I think context matters very, very greatly on this. I think you can have the most secure process with the most secure policing with the best developers, and then end up putting this application on which is running in isolation that doesn't even have any sensitive information behind it. Right. So it first of all matters how secure does it actually need to be. In terms of what you're actually using for. It might be just no state, immutable, nothing behind it. So I think it greatly depends on the sensitivity of what is actually running behind that application before you add libraries. I think as you get to the kind of bigger enterprises whereby people and developers love adding libraries. Wow, cool new functions are shining, let's get it. But developers don't rarely consider the actual consequence of that. Not just from the security point of view, but from the operations overhead in terms of actually running and maintaining that. So just because a developer wants a particular dependency, I've got a big Java background, but I'm getting more and more into the Node space, which makes me laugh daily about how many dependencies one dependency actually can have behind it. So yeah, a lot of developers don't actually think about when they put in a dependency what it means in the background. So the larger organizations, yes, absolutely, you can have tools that allow you to have your internal repositories, and developers in very well policed environments can only use dependencies which exist in those internal repositories. And this is, if you are writing an application which really depends on being very, very secure, yeah, absolutely do that. And then if a developer wants to use a new library, they request usage of a new library, that then goes through an audit, that then appears in a repository, and a developer can then use that repository. The application has no ability to go out to an NPM or a Maven Central or something to just grab anything they want. They have a very policed way of doing things. I know plenty of people who do that. Lots of people make lots of money out of that, for example. It's at times, exactly, people are always the problem. Okay, when you look at any issues that occur, computers always do what they're supposed to do. Even if they are developed poorly, it's still the human's fault for developing poorly. People are virtually always the issue. And in terms of trying to police that, taking giving responsibilities to the developer while taking away a lot of their kind of decision-making ability, where they can just wildly say, yeah, I want to use this, yeah, I want to use that. That's one of the only ways of kind of policing that kind of thing.
Going totally off topic here, but that's great, but there's a fine balance, I guess. Because if you do lock down the environment, etc., you're going to lose the good people. So in terms of, well, if I have the skill sets to cover the technology that you guys are using to deliver this business application, but it's a bitch to do my work efficiently from my point of view, then I'll leave.
Yeah, so that may be the case, but then those people will go somewhere where they will be working with developers who are using any software in their applications. And while the easiest way to do something is not necessarily the right way of doing something. So yes, you don't want something that has so much bureaucracy and red tape that it gets in the way of you doing something, but there are absolutely checks that need to be made in order to do something the right way.
Wonderful. I'm hearing like a lot of enforcing policing stuff, which kind of makes me sad and really, really disheartened, because the whole point of DevSecOps is for security ops developers to all be talking to each other and communicating and supporting one another. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So this really just means maybe just don't have enough security experts, no matter what their job title is. They don't need to be kind of like security architect. They just need to know enough about security to help teach their colleagues and raise the knowledge level, because hopefully you're employing the right people and therefore you don't have malicious developers or the malicious DBA or someone who's coming in to kind of, I don't know, plug in USBs into all of your machines, because at that point your threat model's completely I know. Sometimes GCHQ drop by.
They're good as a backup.
So beyond that, it's around kind of like educating and sharing knowledge, and I guess kind of like we as an industry need to figure out how to do that better and not kind of coming down on people really hard and finding ways to have this blameless retros where it's not holding one person to account of you put a faulty line of code into the database, but how can we all stop that from happening again?
Empower to be awesome. So there's a stat that's out there in a report that says developers outnumber security experts 100 to 1. That's a lie. I think they're probably 250 to 1 based on financial services for quite a long time. Give them the information to be awesome. Yeah? Don't beat them with a stick too late. Yeah? Make them able to ingest the information to be as good as they can be before pushing, before committing. It's cheaper and faster and safer to fail in an IDE before any test.
Yeah, I guess this is where I come in and say, yeah, we can probably help you with that. And I guess the one word is, I talk to a lot of CISOs and a lot of people, security architects as well, and the thing that keeps on coming up again and again is skills, and 1 to 250 sounds a bit right to me as well. And I think it is about, these lads are smart lads and ladies, and there is a fun way to empower them and get them into it, because when they feel like they're great at something, they just excel, and you have your security champion and your awareness and all that piece. And I think it's so important, and that's what's going to get us onto the next phase, because no one else is going to be going like, oh, it would be DevSecOps thing. No, not from the get-go. They're going to get into it and get interested, and there's lots of ways we can help you to do that.
Gamification by any chance?
Oh, it is? Yeah. How did you know? How did you know? Yeah, so talk to us. We can help with that.
There's so much editing in this video.
I think one thing, because Kate from Gardens was saying, which actually we need to talk about more, which is getting security people to talk to developers. Because the whole point of DevOps is pulling operations people to talk to developers. Getting security people involved from the very start, and when a new feature gets created, you need security people in the room. Architectures are being designed, you need security people to at least educate the people who are writing the architectures to understand what extra considerations they need. You're using microservices, you need to be HTTPS between microservices, even though it's behind your fortress. all these kind of things need to occur. They might not occur to developers or architects, but security people do know that. And the idea of failing early, the earliest point of that is when an idea comes and someone says it, and then everyone else goes, yeah, you need that security person to say, actually, no. So I think Kate's concept of, well, not Kate's concept, but what Kate mentioned about security people talking to developers is people will say they do DevOps and operations, and developers are still very siloed. DevSecOps, if it wants to follow DevOps, the true concept of DevOps, it needs security people and developers to mix.
And that's a two-way conversation as well. To go back to the question earlier, you're using bleeding edge technology, educate the security guys, bring them up to speed on the tools that you want to use, and they can help you there. It's a two-way conversation. So putting DevOps or security into DevOps is the same as putting DevOps into security as well. So
I would like to mention that sometimes it's also a scale problem. If you have a team of 20 or 30 developers and you have a team of 4 ops, you have one security guy. He's not able to be in all meetings, be in all projects, and help all other teams also grow. So it's a scale problem that also is a resource constraint.
I agree. I talk about how tools can drive cultural change, which also brings on to the skills thing. So if you're feeling frustrated that you don't have the skill set to culturally accept, considering the security implications, that manifests itself in a human form. And what I've seen is that you can use certain metrics. I'm happy to discuss the detail afterwards. Is how to, kind of gamify a game, make it competitive, share the knowledge, but segregate out why is one business area developing in a more secure manner than another. Is that education? Is it culture? Is it time? Is it money? What is it? And start to share that knowledge across. Because this is a cultural movement. Yeah, DevOps has been a cultural movement forever. The tools are pretty easy, I think anyway. That's what I do. But until you change the mindset into actually, I want to go faster, but I want to keep that quality. I don't want to lose my data. I don't want to be vulnerable. That's a people thing, and you can make people more interested in that by objectifying them. Some people. There is an interesting statistic, not by myself, that if you go through a digital transformation, that 16%, I believe, is the figure that's banded around, won't make the journey. Yeah, that's collateral. That's their incapability to adopt. And this is about moving the business faster, securely, to remain competitive and remain in business. It's a sad statistic, it's not my statistic, but it's out there.
So I think you mentioned a very important word there, which is quality. And I think this is very important to communicate with developers, because one of the problems we're facing is developers think that security is a blocker. That's where all our problems are coming from. It's a blocker. So the culture shift is basically convince developers that security is not a blocker, is an enabler. And by writing more secure software, they will be writing a software which will have better quality. So it's a quality attribute.
So I disagree that developers are the blockers. Developers aren't the blockers.
No, so security,
they consider security a blocker, but they only consider security a blocker because typically this is what happens. A developer has worked for 6 months or however long on their feature. They go through all the testing, everything occurs, and then a security person will come with a manual as thick as
or a mallet as a tool and say what you've written is rubbish. Rewrite it.
Just before they say, right, you need to fix all these before we go live, and that is a blocker. They have to do that before they go live, right? So yes, developers consider that a blocker, but they consider it a blocker because they are trying to do things in an agile DevOps way, and the security practices their organization uses isn't agile, isn't capable of running in an agile or DevOps way. So it's the organisation that needs to change. So it's the organisation.
Exactly. So it's a culture shift.
That's the actual blocker here, rather than developers considering security. But I agree that's why developers aren't adopting it. Sure.
So a question for everybody. So we're talking a lot about developers, and developers usually have to use infrastructure. And infrastructure comes out of the box with some defaults that can be made more secure or less secure, depending on how you set them up. So a question to all of you: how are we as DevSecOps making the lives of developers easier by providing them with secure stuff to work on in the first place? Tooling. But does everybody do this? Because I hear time and time again of Tesla making a mistake in how they set up their something, the Kubernetes or whatever it was, like, et cetera, et cetera. So tooling doesn't always capture it. How does that, so like, how do we take responsibility for that problem?
So developer tooling is often great because your users are in the building and they can't run away from you. So I suppose kind of like internal tooling can be really helpful. I mostly work on AWS and there's a huge amount of open source amazing projects, things like CFN-NAG, which will is like a linter for your CloudFormation templates and will catch up kind of like all these kinds of like security issues potentially. But then you need to actually make sure that people are understanding the warnings and kind of like adopting the tooling. If you're building your own dashboards, are people actually looking at them? Do they understand them? Have you sat with them and worked out that no one actually knows that that's a link and they can click on it or that drop down opens? So it's also a UX issue if you're trying to kind of like convey that information to developers. And internal tooling is actually really helpful because some of the kind of like cloud providers are not hugely helpful if you're kind of like not working on them every day all day.
Not to labour a point, but to labour a point. If you've got infrastructure as code, you can detect infrastructure drift where you want to concentrate your testing on, so you don't have to test, a virtual data center of a million servers, ridiculous numbers, where you can actually concentrate on, okay, this has changed. Why has it changed? What drove that change? Is it a commit? Is it a new business area spinning up? So you can focus in, because we've all got limited resources, and they need automation. Always focused automation.
No, just back to the point about providing a secure environment for developers and even workloads to run within. It's a very valid point because there has to be guardrails. So you do the work beforehand. So depending on your workload and what you provide to developers, you make sure that it's a secure environment. You've given them, even though you give them the liberty, but there's guardrails to make sure that they can operate securely within that environment. An environment where there's so much new technology and there has to be specialized people that look at specialized tooling or environments to make it secure as a base before you hand it over for people to consume. So you can't expect, not that the fastest people to pick up the tool off the shelf doesn't mean that they're the right people to actually secure it for people to run in production. So that's why it's DevSecOps. So every part of that chain, both the dev, the ops, and the security people have to understand what each other do and the need to be secure. So that's my
question is, everyone is saying automation, but automation takes time to build. How do you guys, it's not just, you don't just buy it off the shelf, plug it in, and it works. Most times you have to customize it and train people with it. So how do you guys handle, because I think automation is just another catchphrase now.
So I'm inherently lazy. That's an attribute of my being. So more than twice needs automating. So I look at a task. I remember my first ever role as an operator. I actually had a physical trolley of papers that I had to go through and tick the list and do things every day. I couldn't accept that, so I started to pick away at the easy wins. Why can I not get an automated report that I can check that balance against that balance? Why do I need to go and so it's picking away at that monolith of process, if you like. So map your process out. You will have easy wins. Honestly, you will, and you can make some really quick ingress into moving towards not repeating things that are manual, or you can parameterize them. Other things will take time. Yeah, so not everything, you're just not going to walk into your office tomorrow and say, right, I've automated my end-to-end process. That's just not how it works. Consider value stream mapping. Do you understand your process? Do you understand the handoffs of how you deliver things? Who asks for something? Who drives the idea? Where do you capture the idea? How do you code against the idea? How do you test against the idea? How do you make sure the delivery of the idea is secure? Consider the end-to-end process of how you deliver IT for your business, and then pick off small chunks would be my advice.
That's a good idea.
I know I'm doing a lot.
Can I just add something? So with automation, right? First thing to do is to check that you're not reinventing the wheel, because it's quite possible that someone else is doing exactly the same task, and just like Brian said, to say twice is too much, right? They're just gonna automate it, write the script, and most likely they're gonna share it. So the good thing about open source, sharing is caring. So it's quite possible that the automation script will be available somewhere. So look at our first talk, right? Teresa talking about finding servers based on the reboot time in order to assist the huge task of decommissioning, right? She saw it for her organization. How many companies in the world have the same problem? I reckon every single big one, which has more than, I don't know, 20, 30, 100 servers, right, will have the same problem. So if Teresa goes and shares this little piece of PowerShell script on GitHub, right, and it becomes known to people who can just go and Google it, so how do I automate server decommissioning, and this repository comes up, they can just download that script, run it with almost no changes, right, and that's it.
Running things that you don't know what they do is a very big risk.
Of course, validated. What I'm saying is, with automation, there is already a lot of tasks, a lot of scripts which are already shared, making the job of automation easier. Because in our world, in IT world, most people run more or less the same thing. People running Windows servers, they face the same challenges. People running Red Hat servers in a data center, which is their own data center on-prem, they face more or less the same challenges. People using the cloud, AWS, Google, Azure, they will be facing more or less the same challenges. And yeah, they will go and solve them. And obviously, if they're going to share them, then just why not reuse it?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything there. I think a couple of things I'll add is that automation needs to be part of the process, not something that's at the end as well. So for developers who are trying something, don't just say, I'm going to do 2 weeks work and then I'm going to automate it. Automate as you go, and it doesn't become a job, it just becomes part of the way, and that's a big culture change. If we're talking about purely security automation, this is almost certainly something that's already been solved by others in the organization, either through quality, through delivery, through a whole bunch of other things. So, there are a lot of automation tools. A lot of developers and a lot of other people have solved this, but for certain parts, they just need to remap it to other issues. If people are using Agile, if people are using DevOps, they're already doing automation to some extent. So I'd add that, and also, as I mentioned, make it part of your process. Don't make it a task of you.
Yeah, a big thing for us about developing internal tooling was going around and talking to the various teams and realizing that someone on that team had already written a script to do something that should have been automated. It was a task they were doing repetitively. And then be like, that's amazing. Like, does anyone else know about that? Other people probably want to use it. You should kind of talk to that person, and building that network where people are aware of the internal tools that you have in your organization. Because if you're big enough, someone has probably already solved it. Knowledge sharing is again the issue.
It's the idea of inner source.
I'm losing a lot of weight tonight.
Where do you look into?
Automation, in my experience, I've seen the same automation written 3 or 4 times. So, and over time, the same automation is always written. So it's also about capturing the knowledge of the internal tooling and making it aware to the new person who comes in, who starts from scratch. The other thing with automation is getting management buy-in to increase the timescale it take to do something to build the automation in. Because you can do a lot of stuff very quickly because you just know how to punch the buttons. But convincing management that actually we can automate this, and so it's changing the time where you save the time. Your management trusting you hit all the buttons really fast, accurately every time. Yeah, they will trust that better than spending the time to do automation sometimes. I need to come and talk to you.
There's also a problem with automation.
problem with automation is that you automate it and then you never think about it and you just click it, it happens. So when you do bring on new people and you teach people, it's also really important for people to say, question everything, right? Because a lot of the time you actually automate and run things that actually doesn't do anything that you want it to do, and you just run it. And this is a good question when we say, oh yeah, this build takes 15 hours. And if you're to actually write it from scratch, it'll probably take 1, right? But it does a whole bunch of stuff that you actually don't need to do. So make sure that your automation should be a living artifact that you continually maintain as well.
Debbie.
I'm not going to ask any more questions because we've done over an hour just on the first way, which is great. So I don't have a chance to blame the architects because can they code or not? I think tonight has been a great chat. I think lots of people have been involved and hopefully there's some takeaway there for people. And I'm serious, if somebody wants to write it out, I appreciate it. So I do want to leave some time for networking, which is now. So I will end the chat here. So mingle. Thank you. It's over there. Yeah.